Well, over the years, a lot of surveys have been taken of the general public in order to find out what their opinions were of organized religion and of Christianity in general. There have been a bunch of surveys like this, and I'm guessing that most of you have seen those surveys. They've been out in newspapers and magazines. And one of the common threads seems to be that there's a lot of people in society, in fact, most people, they like Jesus, but they don't necessarily like the church. Jesus remains as popular as ever, but the institution of the church does not. And it's interesting that even people who have never even darkened the door of a church for their entire lives seem to have a very high opinion of the person of Jesus of Nazareth, but they don't have a high opinion of the church. And one has to ask the question, well, if they've never been to church, how is it that they've heard of Jesus? Well, that's because Jesus of Nazareth is one of the most well-known public figures in all of world history. If you've ever heard of people like Muhammad or of Buddha or of Gandhi, then chances are you've also heard of Jesus, although I see signs of that waning. But speaking of Gandhi, this is what Gandhi said. Gandhi seemed to kind of echo what the sentiments are of a lot of people today. Gandhi said this, and I quote, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." Unquote. Ouch. Ouch. I've never liked that quote, but it always forces me, honestly, to look in the mirror. There's a lot that can be said about it, but because there's more than just a kernel of truth to it. One of the most common charges leveled against us, and I'm including myself in this, the church overall, is that we are mean and hypocritical. Sometimes those charges are unfounded, other times they're not. I will tell you, in the years that I've been a pastor, I've gone out and I've spied on visited other churches. That was a Freudian slip. And I just went in as a visitor, and I encountered members of that church that were as cold as ice. They would make the iceberg that sank the Titanic look like warm. And some of them were downright rude. And I thought to myself, wow, no wonder. I mean, who would want to come to a church like this? But then I remembered something. You know, if those folks were perfect, they wouldn't need to be in the church, would they? If they were perfect, there would be no need for a church. It would be paradise. It would be the Garden of Eden. There would be no sin in the world. But then I remember they're in the church because they need to hear the same thing that you need to hear and that I need to hear. I'm including myself. Every week that there is a God in heaven who forgives sins on earth on account of Christ. You know, sometimes people expect us, you and me, and I'm including me, they expect us to be more than what we really are. We can kind of understand that because we're dealing with a consumer society. People are promised a bill of goods by every institution in society, particularly businesses. They're promised the best value. They're promised excellence in service, excellence in product, and so it's only natural that they come to expect that from the church as well. And because we are a religious institution, the public expects us to be like the Christ we represent. But the problem is we're not. We're not. We're just regular people who need to hear that there is a God in heaven who forgives sins on earth. And I think that's why people get disappointed in the church, is because they expect us to be more than what we really are and what we can be. Let me ask each of you this question. What do you think of Christ? What do you think of Jesus, the one who is called Christ? I'm not asking you what you think of the church. That's almost a redundant question. What do you think of Christ? The opinions that you and I have, the view that you and I have of the person of Jesus of Nazareth, was largely formed by our years in the Sunday school many moons ago. We were all taught that Jesus is meek and mild and has children on his lap, and we saw pictures on the Sunday school walls that showed him carrying lambs and showed him with little children. I can remember being taught certain things about Jesus. In the Sunday school, I was taught that Jesus was always super duper nice to people. Jesus would never stand up to a bully, and Jesus was always just this really sweet, sugary sort of person, always, always, always. And then one Saturday evening during Lent, I remember there was a movie, one of those Bible movies that came on TV, and every Sunday school kid watched it. And there was a scene in that movie when Jesus drove the money changers from the temple. And we hadn't heard that in Sunday school. And here was Jesus looking angry and flipping over the tables of the money changers. Kind of scared me, honestly. And he made this whip and was driving the people out. Well, that was on a Saturday evening. Our poor Sunday school teacher the next morning was bombarded with questions. Hey, you told us that Jesus is always nice. What's the deal with flipping over the tables? What's the deal with the homemade whip and him whacking people with it? That movie showed us a part that we had not been taught in Sunday school. Matthew chapter 21, Luke chapter 19. It was conveniently left out of our Sunday school curriculum. Today is another one of those, Luke chapter 12. It doesn't show us the nice Jesus. Instead, we hear Jesus saying these words, verse 49. I came to bring fire to the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. Doesn't sound real nice to me. Drop down to verse 51. He says this, do you think that I've come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, 5 in one household will be divided. 3 against 2 and 2 against 3, they will be divided. Father against son and son against father. Mother against daughter and daughter against mother. Mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Every year at Christmas, and it's not that far off, by the way, we always hear that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. That's from Isaiah 9:6. And he is, but it doesn't sound like he's claiming that title today, does it? Let me see if I can sum it up and just kind of put it in a nutshell. Jesus is saying that for many people in this world, if they decide to go all in on being his followers, what he's saying is that's going to cost them something. That's essentially what he's saying. He's saying if you want to be his completely sold out, all in, fully committed follower, it could cost you something. It could cost you a relationship. Maybe you and I can relate to that. Maybe we can't. Everybody's experience is a little bit different. But you know, there have been people who have been disowned within their own families because they became committed Christians. This has happened to people who came from Muslim families, but I actually saw it happen to one family in New York City. Their daughter started attending church and became basically a Jesus person, and her mom and dad were beside themselves. They said, "Where did we go wrong?" It does happen to people. C.S. Lewis wrote one of the most endearing books of all time entitled The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Now, if you've ever read C.S. Lewis, you know he goes heavily on metaphor. And in this particular story, the person of Jesus Christ is portrayed by a lion by the name of Aslan. And Mr. and Mrs. Beaver are a couple who are trying to introduce 4 children to Aslan the lion. Again, this is a metaphor for Christ. And they're not really quite sure how to do this, and the children are not sure that they want to meet him. And here's what Mr. Beaver says to the kids about Aslan the lion, and I quote, "Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. You'll understand when you see him." "But shall we see him?" asked Susan. "Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you where you shall meet him," said Mr. Beaver. "Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "Aslan a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion." "Oh," said Susan, "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly." "Then is he safe?" asked Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you." Unquote. That's a good way to think of Jesus Christ. He's not safe, but he is good. And you know why he isn't safe? It's because he refuses to bend and to conform to the demands that the world places upon him. And instead, he commands the world and his church to conform to him and to his ways. And we should want to, because he is essentially good in every aspect of his character and his being. You know, one of the names for Jesus in the Bible, there's a lot of different names for the person of Christ. You know, one of those is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. That comes from Revelation 5:5. And I think that's where C.S. Lewis got the idea for his story. The Lion of the tribe of Judah. How many lions have you seen on Sunday school walls? I wish there were more. You know, I think it'd be neat if we had a lion statue out here in our east lawn, kind of like they have downtown, and put an inscription underneath, "The Lion of the tribe of Judah." Jesus is not the weak and wimpy, milquetoast Jesus that many have been taught to believe in. That's because he's not safe, but he's good. But he is good. And he will not conform to the ways of the world, but he does command that the world conform to him. May we as his church do so. Amen.